I'm here today to announce real relief for Alberta families who for weeks have watched as prices at the pump continue to climb higher and higher. Between the uncertainty caused by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, plus skyrocketing inflation spurred on by Justin Trudeau's reckless deficit spending, and on top of all of that, his planned carbon tax hike on April the 1st, it's costing families more and more to get their kids to school and to drive to work. Alberta's government has been urging the Trudeau Liberals to listen to Canadians' concerns and address rising inflation. But instead, Ottawa is doing just the opposite. With their big April Fool's Day joke, yet another hike in their job-killing carbon tax on April the 1st. That's when the federal government will add 3 cents per litre to the cost of gas at the worst possible time. So right now, at a time when everything is getting more expensive, in part because of the pressures of Ottawa's deficit spending, Ottawa is adding to that pain by directly increasing how much it costs to take your kids to school or to hockey practice, and how much it costs to drive to work. And let's be clear, these costs will drive up the price of groceries and further as it costs more and more to get delivery trucks from warehouses to stores. So here we are, after 2 years of having often lived apart, often isolated as a result of the pandemic restrictions, just when life is really starting to get back to normal. And now all of a sudden, people are worried about how they're going to pay to fill up their gas tank and buy their groceries. That is why I am announcing a bold decision that will give real relief to Albertans struggling to keep up with increasing costs. Alberta will end the collection of the provincial fuel tax. This means the price at the pump will drop by 13 cents a litre, putting money back into the pockets of Albertans. This will apply to gasoline and diesel, including marked fuel. This massive tax relief is a response to skyrocketing costs at the pump and is going to provide Albertans with the relief that they need when the cost of everything's going up. As a result, this relief is based on a sliding scale for oil prices. When the price of oil is over $90, that's West Texas Intermediate, per barrel, the fuel tax will be removed completely. When the price of oil is less than $80 per barrel of WTI, the fuel tax of 13 cents per litre will be in full effect. And that protects Alberta's budget, it protects our fiscal health as a province, because as those oil prices go up, so too do revenues to the provincial treasury. So this is a fiscally responsible measure that will only provide this relief if in fact the province is generating significantly additional revenues. And that altogether, this helps us to address cost pressures that are making life harder for families. I really don't understand how Justin Trudeau and Rachel Notley can possibly think that now is the right time to add even more costs to day-to-day living with their punishing carbon tax. You know, I want to remind Albertans that as Bill number 1 of this government, we scrapped the NDP carbon tax. The Carbon Tax Repeal Act was passed, which was the single largest tax cut in Alberta history. Unfortunately, just a few months later, Justin Trudeau imposed his punishing carbon tax, punishing people for heating their homes, filling up their gas tanks, and driving to work. And now they want to triple it. The next installment comes on April the 1st, cheered on by Alberta's NDP. That's just irresponsible. And so the measures that we are announcing today are the way that we can provide the relief that we offered in scrapping the carbon tax in the first place. So for Albertans who are looking at the price of everything going up, from fruit and vegetables to fuel, this is real relief. On top of ending the fuel tax, we'll also provide relief to families and small businesses struggling with the higher cost of electricity. Alberta families who have consumed less than 250 megawatt hours of electricity, and that's the vast majority, that's almost all households, they'll receive a $150 rebate on their electricity bills for this past winter. We'll take action as soon as possible to introduce legislation and get this done. It may take a bit of time for Albertans to actually receive the rebate, as we have to work with over 45 energy providers in the province, but rest assured this relief is coming, and Minister Notley will provide more details in a moment. Albertans told us they needed relief from rising costs. We've heard them loud and clear. And that's why today we are taking this bold action to soften the blow of inflation, especially on the cost of energy. With that, I'll introduce our Finance Minister, Travis Toews, to provide some more details.
Well, thank you, Premier. As the Premier mentioned, Albertans have been voicing their concerns about inflation and the rising costs of living and calling for action. When I spoke with Albertans ahead of this year's budget, affordability was one of the main issues I heard about. To be more specific, people were worried about inflation and the consistent price increases that they're seeing for the basic goods they need to provide for themselves and their families. In Budget 2022, announced just 2 weeks ago, we provided relief for Albertans across the board. It provides relief for low-income students in high-demand programs with $15 million in non-repayable supports. It provides relief for parents of young children with $666 million this year alone to bring childcare costs down and create more spaces. It provides relief for Albertans in rural and remote locations by making affordable, accessible broadband a reality with a $390 million investment over 4 years. It provides consumer protection for Albertans against high natural gas prices. And Budget 2022 maintains Alberta's affordability advantage compared to other provinces with no provincial sales tax, no payroll tax or healthcare premium, and a low personal income tax rate. Alberta remains the most affordable and best place in Canada to live, work, and raise a family. However, the inflationary environment we find ourselves in is in part an unfortunate reality of the federal government's inflationary spending and lack of fiscal restraint. In fact, as I've toured the province right after tabling the new budget, I've repeatedly emphasized that the best thing a government can do in times of increased inflationary pressures is to spend less, borrow less, and tax less. Today we're here to announce a fuel tax relief measure so that Albertans will pay less tax at the pump. Today, on top of the affordability initiatives in Budget 2022 and Alberta's affordability advantage, we are taking further steps. Albertans will see immediate relief on April 1st with a drop of 13 cents per litre at the pumps. The change to Alberta's fuel tax will put money back in Albertans' pockets at a time when other levels of government seek to take more out. It will apply to gasoline and diesel, including marked fuel. The program will be reset on a quarterly basis based on a sliding scale of WTI prices. When the price of oil is less than $80 per barrel of WTI, the fuel tax of 13 cents per litre will be in effect. However, as WTI prices increase to over $90 per barrel, the fuel tax will be removed completely. I know many Albertans are feeling like their dollar doesn't stretch as far as it used to. And in addition to the rising costs of many goods and services, we're seeing sticker shock at the gas pump as well. We've heard your concerns and your calls to make life a little bit easier. We will continue to provide support where we can and call on all other levels of government to do their part as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Taves, and good afternoon, everyone. As the Premier noted, we are developing a new electricity rebate designed to help millions of Albertans who faced high utility bills this year. Since 2019, our government has worked hard to begin the difficult but necessary process of modernizing and strengthening Alberta's utility system. For too long, previous governments neglected Alberta's natural gas and electricity systems or touted short-term solutions that did nothing to enhance future capacity and responsibly manage system costs. Alberta's government is working hard to support a competitive market that provides choices to consumers and competitive market conditions in the face of decarbonization efforts. However, we also committed to standing up for hard-working Albertans. As the Premier and Minister Taves both noted, the cost of living and inflation are soaring right now. Increases in wholesale natural gas and electricity prices have meant higher bills for families and businesses across our province. What's more, the carbon tax is about to make this problem even worse, and Justin Trudeau has been punishing Alberta families for simply heating their homes in the winter. In addition, previous governments' failed utility policies are also costing us a fortune. That's why we have been responsibly managing costs, which must be paid back by ratepayers. Since 2020, only $100 million in necessary new transmission has been built, compared to the $7.5 billion that was built from 2015 to 2019. This is a direct result of our commitment to bringing fiscal responsibility to the electricity grid in Alberta. To make things worse, a hasty coal phase-out was celebrated by the NDP government, who failed to warn Albertans this shift in our energy supply would be punishing to everyday Albertans. That is why we are announcing an innovative natural gas price protection program last month, a program that creates cost certainty to shield Albertans from the alarming price spikes recently seen in Europe. That rebate program will give Albertans certainty that a historic gas spike will not hit their pocketbooks. Now, today's announcement will offer short-term relief on the electricity portion of their bills. As the Premier stated, Alberta's government will also be launching a new electricity rebate that will help millions of Albertans with their bills. Later this year, nearly 2 million families, farms, and businesses in the province will receive three $50 monthly electricity rebates, which will retroactively target January, February, and March 2022 bills. The rebate will be applied right to people's bills. No paperwork or confusing application forms will be necessary. If you pay an electricity bill, you will see this rebate on it. Most households, farms, and small businesses are expected to be eligible. Our government will table new legislation this spring to quickly enable the program. This rebate will combine with the natural gas price protection program announced in Budget 2022 to provide real relief and certainty for millions of Alberta ratepayers on all sides of their utility bills. I look forward to sharing additional details as soon as possible. This short-term relief is just one aspect of the work we are doing to defend Alberta ratepayers. We are leaving no stone left unturned to address the increasing costs while supporting a free, open, and competitive market. Part of this includes the legislation we are introducing this spring to better plan for the future of Alberta's electricity distribution infrastructure to help keep long-term system costs affordable. This legislation will also increase competition in the marketplace. Our approach is working. You can see it in the more than $5 billion in investment announced for generation projects, including more than $2 billion for utility-scale renewable projects since July 2019. You can see it in the approximately 50 power plants now under construction, totaling over 4,000 megawatts of generation capacity. The Canada Energy Regulator also recently forecasted that Alberta will be in Canada's leader in renewable energy growth in the years ahead. All of this is work that Albertans can be proud of, and that we will continue to drive forward to make sure our province remains the best place to live, work, and raise a family. We are standing up for consumers and making sure that life in Alberta remains affordable with this timely rebate, and by doing the hard work to create a stronger, better system for generations to come. Thank you, and we are all happy to take any questions you may have now.
Thanks, Minister Nally. That concludes the formal portion of today's announcement, and we're now going to have a media Q&A. Just a reminder to everybody that we'd ask you to limit yourself to one question and one follow-up. As well as anyone who's shown up in person, please identify yourself, your outlet, and who you're directing a question to. We have Premier Kenney, Minister Taves, and Associate Minister Nally available. And just because there's so many smiling faces here in person, we just want to start on the phones to touch base with folks who haven't joined us in person. So, operator, can you please put through our first call?
Thank you. Rick Bell, Calgary Sun.
Good afternoon, Premier and Ministers. Last week, Premier, you talked about you were kind of waiting for the Prime Minister to do something on the carbon tax, and if he did something, then you would seriously look at doing something. What you've done today is you've acted without him doing anything. So what caused you to sort of change your mind on that and come forward with what you came forward with today?
Well, Rick, the point I was making is that if Alberta steps forward to offer tax relief to families, that's going to be undermined by Justin Trudeau's carbon tax hike on April the 1st. But we've decided to go ahead anyway because Albertans simply need the relief. And since then, we've seen a further huge spike in oil prices. In fact, oil prices have gone up by about 20% since mid last week. And so with the increasing cost of fuel, and by the way, what people are paying for at the pump right now is probably based on what the oil prices were about 3-4 weeks ago. So we know that there will be much higher prices at the pump, And so relief is urgently needed right now. Let me put this in perspective. Where Rachel Notley's NDP carbon tax was collecting about $1.3 billion in revenue. The measures we've announced today will provide Alberta families with $1.3 billion in fuel tax revenue on an annualized basis and nearly $300 million in electricity rebates. That is nearly $1.7 billion of potential cost relief, far more than the NDP was collecting in carbon taxes. We scrapped that carbon tax. Unfortunately, Justin Trudeau then imposed his own. We challenged it in court, but we lost at the Supreme Court by 5-3 vote. And now the Trudeau Liberals, backed up by the Notley NDP, want to triple the cost of that carbon tax at the worst possible time. We won't stand for it. And that's why we're providing this significant relief. This is basically the reverse carbon tax. This is the opposite of the Liberal NDP carbon tax.
Thank you, Premier. Rick, do you have a follow-up today?
Yes. This is the economics, and this will affect people's pocketbook. But what do you say to those people who say part of this might be also motivated by the fact you're facing a tough leadership challenge in the next few weeks?
Rick, we've heard from Albertans for months now that they're concerned about the growing cost of living. This government was elected to reduce the cost of living by scrapping the carbon tax. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court has overturned our ability to do that. And so this is another way that we can effectively keep one of the central campaign commitments we made back in the spring of 2019 to scrap the carbon tax. We don't control the carbon tax, but we do control our own fuel prices, our own fuel taxes, I should say, and that's why we're taking this measure. So this is at a time of growing energy prices and inflation. This is a way that indirectly that we can keep the spirit of our carbon tax scrap commitment of spring of 2019.
Thank you, Premier. Operator, can you please connect our next call?
Safe Kaiser, City News.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for taking my questions. Mr. Premier, since gas stations build that 13 cents a liter tax into the actual pricing shown, I'm wondering how you'll be sure those stations will actually drop those prices by 13 cents and, people save that money and they don't just collect the price.
Absolutely. Great question, Safe. So first of all, we would like to have this 13-cent reduction in the provincial fuel tax apply tonight, immediately. Unfortunately, those retailers have already purchased their fuel based on that tax being in place. And so we have to spend a little bit of time working out how to unroll the tax in their current inventory. That will take us a couple weeks, which is why this will not be able to come into effect until April the 1st. If we could do it any quicker, we certainly will, but we believe technically it'll take a couple weeks for us to unroll the excise tax that's already embedded in the fuel that they purchased. But we will be making it absolutely plain to the gas retailers that they must pass on this full savings to Alberta gas consumers. We'll be monitoring that very closely, and Minister Toews will have more to say about that.
Yes, well, thank you, Premier. Absolutely, that we will be paying attention to the pricing behaviors of retailers, and we'll be providing enough time so that retailers can effectively be confident that the tax that's built into their current inventory will be rebated. Ultimately, on top of that, we really do have quite a competitive retail system for the distribution of gas and diesel, and there will be competitive forces that I hope would not only take it down 13 cents, but even beyond that.
Can I just add before you come back to it? One problem here, Safe, is that as we take down the Alberta gas tax on April 1, Justin Trudeau wants to raise his carbon tax. So we take it down by 13 cents, he adds 3 cents, it's a net 10-cent difference. So I will be introducing a motion in Alberta's legislature calling on the Prime Minister to park his carbon tax hike. I mean, look, what the Liberals and NDP always wanted with their job-killing carbon taxes was to make energy unaffordable for people. Well, guess what? They've got that right now. So stop kicking the consumer when the consumer's already down.
Thank you, Premier. And Safe, did you have a follow-up today?
I do. Not sure if this is better asked to the Premier or maybe the Finance Minister since he's there, but just wondering how this reduction of 13 cents per litre will affect the surplus that was expected with this latest budget. Now, I know you explained the sliding scale a little, but surely you would still lose out on some of those taxes, no?
Well, one of the great things about this major tax relief is that it will not negatively affect our balanced budget position. The budget that Travis just tabled was projecting a oil price benchmark of $80 a barrel, and in fact, if the price goes below $80 a barrel, the excise tax will continue to apply. But if we actually experience $90 WTI oil prices over the course of the forthcoming fiscal year, that would be worth an extra $5 billion in Alberta revenues. If prices average out at, sorry, am I getting the increments correct here? You are. Yeah, if they go to $100 a barrel, we're $10 billion ahead. So this is a budget protection measure to ensure that we don't jeopardize our hard-fought balanced budget. Travis, you'd like to comment more?
Sure, no, Premier, you've covered it. As you noted, at $80 WTI, this program would start to kick in. And as I think you all recall, we had projected $70 WTI in the upcoming budget. And with $70 WTI prices, again, we were projecting a budget surplus of $500 million. So to get from $70 to $80, that's a $10 price spread differential in WTI. And the sensitivity on government revenues right now for every dollar move in WTI is $500 million. So the move from $70 to $80 WTI will land another $5 billion in the province's fisc. And this program, if it's in fact implemented in place all year, in other words, if energy prices stay high for a full fiscal year, it will cost us approximately $1.3 billion. So we will be ahead fiscally, in spite of the fact that we're able to provide this deep tax relief for Albertans.
Thanks. And thanks. I just need to correct. I got the increments wrong because oil prices have been moving so quickly. Yeah, the budget projected $70 WTI, and this kicks in at the tax relief at $80 WTI, which would be when we're $5 billion ahead in terms of projected royalty revenue. This again, there is budget protection built into the whole program.
Thanks, Premier. If we do have time at the end of this, I'll hop back to the phones. But for now, we're just going to take our first question from the line.
Hello, Janet French from the CBC. Is my on? I'm just following up on the math that I just heard. So if you're potentially at $80 a barrel, drawing in $5 billion extra into the Treasury, but spending $1.3 billion on rebates, why not pass more of those expected savings onto consumers through other rebates for cost relief?
Well, we are. Thanks, Janet. So the answer is we are. First of all, through the electricity rebate measures that Minister Nally just announced, which would cost the Treasury about I shouldn't say cost the Treasury, it's a $280 million fiscal benefit for Alberta families. So that's very significant. In addition, we have announced a trigger for gas price relief if gas prices for natural gas hit $6.50 a gigajoule, then there would be a rebate as well from the Alberta Treasury. So when you add all of these measures up, it's very significant. In fact, the $280 million in savings from the electricity rebate, plus the $1.3 billion savings in the fuel tax relief, is a total of nearly $1.7 billion. To put that in context, that is almost 25% more than the amount that the NDP squeezed out of Alberta taxpayers through the carbon tax. So we came to office on a commitment to scrap the carbon tax in order to reduce the cost of living. And now with these measures, we're actually going further than that initial commitment if the prices are in the range of over $90 a barrel, with a total of $1.7 billion in consumer savings. In addition to that, As I say, there's that gas price protection in place.
And Janet, you can go ahead with your follow-up.
Yeah, just to follow up about your upcoming trip to Texas. You've said that Alberta could be poised to step in and replace some of those Russian petroleum products should people choose to sanction that country. But can you please explain to me more practically, what is your idea for how Alberta could, in the short term, replace some of those products, get them to market? How would Alberta ramp up production? How much production do we have the capacity to ramp up in the coming weeks, and how would we get it to the US and to Europe?
Great questions. Thank you very much. And I'll be speaking exactly on those points in Houston at the major global oil and gas conference this week, together with Minister Savage. The world realizes that what Alberta has always said is true, that the world needs more reliable, responsibly produced, democratic energy from Alberta, from Canada, as opposed to relying on dictator conflict oil from the world's worst regimes. Even today, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, has said that North America should be given, quotes, a climate change pass to help wean the European Union and other markets off of Russian oil and gas. And so discussions are evolving on this rapidly. I will be speaking to not just global energy leaders, but also U.S. political leaders at Sierra Week and in the days to come about whatever we can do as rapidly as quickly to get additional infrastructure built on an urgent basis. It's a matter of global security urgency that we get this done as quickly as possible. Now, there is some flex in the current pipeline infrastructure for Alberta Energy. We hit a record high in November of last year of exporting just a notch over 4 million barrels a day. And we've been averaging since then about 3.8 million barrels. So there's actually some flex capacity in the system between rail and pipelines. We expect that the market will fill that flex capacity through additional production and shipments. I anticipate that the oil sands producers, depending on how they schedule their spring turnaround, they can increase production out of their in situ and SAGD projects. In addition, I believe these high prices will incentivize smaller and medium-sized conventional oil and gas companies in Alberta to increase exploration, development, and production. So I think that in the next, throughout 2022, you will likely see record amounts of production and therefore shipments. Now, ultimately, we're going to run into that maximum shipment capacity between rail and pipelines combined. The good news is that there are a number of pipeline reversal and pipeline optimization projects underway in the United States, which we hope will be accelerated given this new energy policy paradigm and the new prices. That should also marginally increase, perhaps by as much as 10%, our export capacity. And then finally, if the United States is serious about this, they could come back to the table and help us build Keystone XL. You know, if President Biden had not vetoed that project, it would be done later this year. It's 840,000 barrels of democratic energy that could have displaced the 600,000 plus barrels of Russian conflict oil that's filled with the blood of Ukrainians. Now, instead, President Biden's White House is talking about him going cap in hand to Saudi Arabia to ask the kingdom to increase its production while Saudi Arabia is using oil money to drop barrel bombs on Yemeni civilians. He's also negotiating with to end the oil sanctions on Iran, a regime that has dropped bombs on civilians in Syria through the Assad regime. And apparently they're also negotiating lifting sanctions on Venezuela, a regime that kills its political enemies and is one of the worst human rights violators on the face of the earth. None of this makes sense. And so I will be speaking truth to power in the bluntest terms possible, that if the US administration wanted, instead of going cap in hand to the Venezuelan, Iranian, Saudi, and dictatorships to replace Russian conflict oil, we could turn this around, I believe, in less than a year. With the infrastructure that was already put in place, the pump stations, the pipe that's been strung on Keystone XL, we could get that done by the very latest at the first quarter of 2023. Now, that may not replace Russian energy immediately, But Putin's been playing about a 10-year game on his Russian invasion. So surely with a little bit of focus and intensity, we could get this done, in addition, of course, to the Trans Mountain expansion, which is still scheduled to come on stream likely in the first quarter of 2023, a year from now, which will add over 500,000 additional barrels of shipment of Alberta oil. But on top of those that I just described, the oil piece, we also need to move fast on LNG. And that means completion of Coastal GasLink. It means clearing any remaining regulatory hurdles to the completion of the $35 million LNG Canada project. It also means, and we are approaching the federal government about this, we need to get behind and ensure the completion of a second major West Coast LNG project. And we are having preliminary discussions to see how we can move forward back to East Coast LNG exports, which would be the most relevant thing that Canada could do right now, given Europe's dependence on Russian gas exports.
Thanks, Premier. Go ahead.
Shailan Skalski with CTV News Edmonton. My question for the Premier. Premier, just a follow-up on that. I want to get your response to comment from a White House press secretary last week when asked about Keystone XL and reconsidering the proposal. She said we need to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, on oil in general. Environmental groups are backing that call, saying this situation in Ukraine signals the need to transition away from oil and gas altogether. Given those comments, how confident are you heading to Houston this week to pitch this global embargo?
Well, you see a growing number of key policymakers in Washington and in the United States saying that U.S. Energy policy must change dramatically to face the crisis of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. In fact, the White House spokesman may have said that we need to reduce, that the U.S. needs to reduce its dependence on foreign oil. At the same time, Reuters reported yesterday that senior Biden advisors are considering having the president visit Saudi Arabia to plead with the king to produce and ship more Saudi conflict oil that has helped to fuel the brutal civil war in Yemen. Also last week, reports that the White House is negotiating with Venezuela to drop sanctions so that they can increase production of dirty conflict foreign oil. And it's well known that they are in advanced discussions to lift the oil embargo on Iran to help that theocratic dictatorship produce and sell more energy. So what the press secretary said is inconsistent with current U.S. energy policy, which could be summarized as this: to stop exports from America's closest friend and ally, but to increase exports from some of the worst regimes in the world. It makes absolutely no sense. And I think we will have a very powerful case to make on this in Houston this week and in Washington in the weeks to come.
Thanks, Premier. You can go ahead.
Yeah, just to follow up more closely on Janet's question, just in regards to realistically Alberta filling that gap. You mentioned some numbers, I think a 10% marginal increase. We're just 200,000 barrels, I think, below our max capacity. Realistically, especially as you mentioned, spring break around the corner, how can we actually fill that gap in the short term?
Well, between the now operational Enbridge Line 3 expansion, plus pipeline optimization, the new Gibson diluent reduction unit for crude by rail shipments, and we believe that we can ship over 4 million barrels a day, and certainly we have an industry that can meet those demands. That doesn't look. Here's the deal: Russia produces about 10 million barrels a day. I think they export about 80% of that, which would constitute about 8% of global energy daily. Global energy consumption. About 600,000 barrels of that Russian oil are going to the United States on a daily basis. So it's true, we cannot turn on a dime and replace all U.S. Russian oil imports overnight. That's because Justin Trudeau vetoed Northern Gateway, killed Energy East, and Joe Biden vetoed Keystone XL. So it's true that our capacity is limited because of irresponsible energy policy from these administrations. But we shouldn't allow the mistakes of the past to prevent us from a sane energy policy in the future. As I say, within the next year, we hope to see a Trans Mountain expansion, shipping another 500,000 barrels a day. And if the U.S. was really serious about getting off its addiction to dictator oil, they would sit down with us. You know, here's my pitch to President Biden. Instead of flying to Riyadh, fly to Calgary. Instead of begging the Saudis to produce more conflict oil, come to Calgary, let's sit down, let's let bygones be bygones. Let's move forward with determination to get KXL done. A lot of the infrastructure is already in the ground. We can get you nearly 900,000 barrels a day, I believe, within a year if we're serious about it.
Thanks, Premier. You can go ahead, Audrey.
Hi, Audrey Neveu from French CBC. We've just talked a lot about this in English. I would like to hear you in French about this, but let me just ask the question again. Monsieur le Premier ministre, comment est-ce que vous verriez que c'est possible pour l'Alberta de remplacer le pétrole russe que les États-Unis importent? Et si c'est possible, comment est-ce que l'Alberta le ferait concrètement?
Bonne question. Et franchement, nous ne pouvons pas le faire demain. Mais nous pouvons ajouter un peu aux exportations aux États-Unis pour aider ce pays avec, j'espère, la fin des importations de pétrole russe qui fournissent la machine de guerre de Vladimir Poutine. Mais cela étant dit, je crois qu'avec la complétion, la termination du Trans Mountain, ça va ajouter considérablement les exportations de pétrole albertain vers les États-Unis et les marchés globaux. Mais deuxièmement, là, si le président est sérieux à cet égard de réduire la dépendance des États-Unis sur les producteurs les pires au monde, au lieu d'aller à l'Arabie saoudite, venir en Alberta, discuter avec nous autres la construction de Keystone XL, parce qu'avec l'infrastructure qui est déjà là, on peut le terminer, je crois, d'ici un an, pour ajouter presque 900 000 barils par jour. Alors, nous ne pouvons pas changer tous les marchés sur le champ, mais il faut commencer quelque part. À cause de le veto de M. Trudeau sur Northern Gateway, Energy East, et de M. Biden sur Keystone XL.
And then a follow-up in English, but if you could also answer in French, please. What do you say to those people who are thinking that your call for this right now is opportunistic because of the war that's going on in Russia right now, that it's a little tone deaf?
Nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, just yesterday, Ukraine's foreign minister said, I'm just finding the quote, let me, by the way, I mean, even Elon Musk, the inventor of the Tesla, has said, hate to say it, but we need to increase oil and gas output immediately. Extraordinary times demand extraordinary measures. The Ukrainian government has pleaded with the world to stop exports of Russian energy and to have it replaced by North American energy. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, who chaired the Glasgow Climate Summit just a few months ago, is saying that North America should be given a pause on climate policy in order to produce more energy to replace Russian energy. This is not just Alberta. This is the whole world now joining Alberta in the message we've been conveying for years. I'll say that briefly in French. Le gouvernement de l'Ukraine a exigé le monde à terminer les exportations de l'énergie russe. Le Premier ministre du Royaume-Uni, qui a présidé le sommet de Glasgow sur le changement climatique dernièrement, il a exigé que l'Amérique du Nord produise davantage de pétrole et de gaz naturel pour remplacer les exportations russes. Et même l'inventeur de Tesla, Elon Musk, a dit que c'est urgent que le monde augmente la production de pétrole et de gaz. Alors, je crois que c'est un consensus global et ce n'est pas seulement un message albertain.
Catherine Gurkowski with Alberta Today. Just to follow up on Safe's question about the consumer protections, just making sure that gas stations don't pocket this. I heard you say you're going to monitor, but is there any regulatory or legislative protections or teeth to make sure that they aren't pocketing this?
Great question, and again, we'll be monitoring it. We don't have legislative ability to set fuel prices, but we have two things right now. We will put pressure on gas realtors or retailers to ensure that they're passing along this tax saving to consumers. On top of that, we do have quite a competitive retail sector in gasoline and diesel fuel products, and so I expect that those competitive forces will be at work, but we'll be monitoring and ensuring that they're passing along these savings to consumers.
And a follow-up to the Premier. Before you were even Premier, this has been your message that we should not be supplying the world's oil through dictator oil, that we need ethical oil. You've created a war room, you have been doing trade missions, and yet with this Russian invasion, Biden's picking up the phone to Saudi Arabia and Venezuela, not you. So what is going to change about your communication, or why do you think they're not picking up the phone and saying, yeah, let's get KXL?
So I was in Washington asking that question just a few weeks ago. I met with the leaders of the top U.S. unions, big supporters of President Biden's election, all of whom were also big supporters of Keystone XL, and they couldn't understand it. They basically said to me that they couldn't find anybody in the administration who understood traditional energy markets. And so all I can say is I hope that this is an awakening, a rude one, admitted, but I hope this is an awakening. I expect in the next few days to be speaking to the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee, Joe Manchin, a Democrat and a critical voice in the American Congress, about this issue as he pushes forward on this. And you know, I would just say to the Biden administration that the way the Americans cannot afford massive increases in oil and gas prices, but they do not want to pay for dictator oil. So, as best we can tell, the reason that President Biden vetoed Keystone XL was it was political payoff to a particular left-wing constituency within his party. And I understand politics sometimes results in bad policy, but during a disaster like this, national security and the vital interests of the global economy must prevail over sectoral political interests. So that will be our message to the United States. And you know what? Who else should be picking up the phone? Because the President of the United States does not speak to Canadian premiers. You know who should be picking up the phone to make that call and deliver that message? His name is Justin Trudeau. He is the head of a government of a country with the third largest energy reserves on Earth. He should be making that call. You know, he's going to be doing photo ops around Europe right now. Here's something he could meaningfully do to disempower Vladimir Putin, and not just Putin, but the mullahs of Iran, the socialist dictators of Venezuela, and the OPEC dictatorships. He could pick up the phone and say, Joe, let's let bygones be bygones. Let's work on North American continental energy security. I'm looking for that kind of leadership from our national government.
Thanks, Premier Kenney. We will be jumping to the phones right after we take our last question from the floor. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's Amber Goslin with the Western Standard. This is a question for the Premier. Premier, there is anger in the riding of Cardston-Siksika after a challenger to the incumbent was disqualified in part because of a Facebook post of her son's. What do you say to those angry UCP members who say it was another case of you protecting your allies?
So I don't know anything about her son's Facebook. I do know that the United Conservative Party has a screening process for people applying to be candidates. When I ran to be leader of the party, one of the primary concerns of our grassroots members was ensuring that we never repeated a Lake of Fire incident with inadequate candidate screening. And that's why we instituted a rigorous and fair process to identify whether potential candidates have done or said things on social media or elsewhere which could be viewed as extremist, intolerant, hateful, and could cause serious reputational damage to the party as a candidate. And that's exactly why we screened out, I think, over 40 nomination applicants prior to the 2019 election. And to be honest, our research wasn't sufficiently comprehensive. We still had some challenges that we had to address. So we are committed to the same rigor. The party has a process in place. I'm not involved in it. There is, at each constituency association has a local candidate selection committee, local candidate nomination committee, LCNC. And the provincial party has a candidate screening committee made up of 10 members, half of whom are elected members of the provincial UCP board, and half of whom are representative of grassroots members. They receive vetting packages based on applications for nomination. This includes incumbents and non-incumbents. And they make an assessment about whether an individual has a record of actions or statements that are outside the values of the party, the values of most Albertans, and that would cause us reputational damage. And my understanding is that in the case of that constituency, there was an applicant who had a large track record of extreme and even hateful postings or repostings on social media, particularly singling out Muslims for approbation, which is not acceptable to this party that believes in tolerance and pluralism. I'll remind you that in the last cycle, we had an applicant named Todd Beasley who wrote that Muslims are Satan worshippers and implied that they should face, that there should be violence against Muslims. I understand that one of the postings here has said that, that one of the repostings from that individual said that, quotes, Islam is a death cult. We will not allow people on the ballot as conservatives who either express or agree with such intolerant views, period, full stop.
Thank you, Premier. And just before we head to the phones for the last question, Amber, do you have a follow-up today?
Yes, I do. Premier, will the government be responding to the 9 pages of side effects and 3% death rate exposed from the Pfizer trial data released last week?
Well, what I can tell you is that in Alberta so far, after the administration of, I believe, nearly 7 million doses of safe and effective vaccines, we have so far recorded 1 fatality. Sadly, 1 person did pass away as a result of complications coming from a Moderna vaccine dose that they had received. I'm not aware of any confirmed cases of deaths associated in Alberta with the administration of Pfizer vaccines, but I am aware of the deaths of some 3,700 Albertans to COVID-19, where it was a primary cause of their death. And I'm grateful to the 90% of Alberta adults who have stepped up to get the protection of vaccines, which has helped us to get this pandemic under control, and we very much hope put it behind us for good.
Thanks very much, Premier. Operator, can you please connect our last call of the day?
Chris Varco, Calgary Herald.
Hi, this first question is for the Premier. Premier, you talk about the fact that Alberta has the ability to help respond to, I guess, displacing oil and gas exports from Russia into the United States and Europe, but that obviously will be a market decision made by companies. Have you spoken with producers in Alberta recently about their ability to increase oil or gas output in the short term? And have you spoken to TC Energy about whether they would consider reviving KXL?
Well, we have ongoing conversations with the producers here, and as you know, we've been encouraging them to actually significantly increase their capital investment in new greenfield developments, both in the conventional and non-conventional sectors. You know, Chris, that they've said they need to repair their balance sheets and investors are demanding dividends. We understand that these are private businesses, but at the end of the day, we remind them that the resource they develop and the dividends that they can pay come from a resource that belongs to the people of Alberta who expect to see a very tangible economic benefit. We'll continue to make that point, encouraging future upstream investment. Chris, I think a lot of that is just going to happen through market forces. I think this is going to be a strong year, for example, for the conventional sector, many of the small and mid-sized companies that have struggled so much since 2014. So I do think that there will be upstream investment that will increase production. And as I say, with TMX scheduled to come on next year, plus pipeline optimization, plus more efficient rail economics, with the Gibson project at Hardisty, altogether, there is some space, there is some flex space, and I would expect a market response to address that. On TC Energy and Keystone XL, you're right, TC Energy has wound up the project, and that is partly the basis of their NAFTA complaint against the Biden administration for its unjustified retroactive veto on the project. But I think there's lots of creative ways that this could be addressed, Chris. You know, if the United States is so desperate to replace Russian conflict oil, then the most obvious answer is Keystone XL. And it sure is a lot less humiliating than having to go cap in hand to the mullahs in Iran and the dictatorships in Saudi and Venezuela. And it sure is it's manifestly better for American global security interests and their economy. So I hope to open discussions with American policymakers. If they're serious about the energy crisis, we're the solution. Perhaps the US government could make up for the mistake that was made last year by de-risking the project in the same way the government of Canada has with TMX. We would be open to working with them on that, to looking at all sorts of creative solutions. Because one thing I think is evident is TC Energy is not prepared to step up and put shareholders' money at risk to restart this for the third time. And so there would have to be very significant de-risking, which again, given the context, I think is very plausible. And then, imagine that a financial platform is created that is largely de-risked. Then invitations could be put out for vendors who want to actually finish that pipeline. So I think there's lots of creative ways that this could be done. Acknowledging that TC Energy would not be able to step up and capitalize the project in a conventional way right now.
Thank you, Premier. And Chris, did you have a follow-up to wrap things up today?
Yes, and this is either for the Premier or maybe this is for Minister Nally, but I'm wondering how long will these two measures that are being announced today be in place for, both for power and for gasoline? And specifically for the electricity, why did you choose $50 checks instead of either putting a cap on electricity prices or a rebate similar to what you've done with natural gas?
So on the timing of both measures, I'll go to Minister Toews, and on the the electricity rebate, I'll go to Minister Nally.
Thanks, Premier. Thanks, Chris, for that question. So in terms of the fuel tax reduction measure, that will take effect April 1st of this year, and it will be evaluated every quarter. This program is going to be implemented for the full fiscal year, again, reevaluated for July 1st, and then again in subsequent quarters. But we're going to implement it for the full year so that Alberta businesses can have the confidence that if energy prices are high, they will have a 13-cent at a cost advantage relative to what they had before this measure was implemented. And on top of that, we will review it then ahead of Budget 2023.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's no magic in terms of that number. We took a look at the cost increases to Albertans, and the average electricity bill has gone up between $14 and $72. So 15 was a nice average, and it costed out at $280 million. So certainly within the fisc. So.
Thank you, Minister. That wraps things up for today. Thanks for joining us today, folks.